when Eleanor Fraser spent her last $500 on a crumbling Victorian mansion at a county foreclosure auction. It was a desperate gamble to provide shelter for herself after losing everything. Following her husband's sudden death and the crushing medical bills that consumed their savings, she never imagined that the strange whispers and unexplained cold spots in the abandoned estate would lead her to a hidden chamber behind the library. Bookcase, a forgotten vault containing the lost fortune of railroad tycoon Cornelius Blackwood, whose mysterious disappearance in 1892 had spawned local legends for generations. A discovery that would make her the target of ruthless treasure hunters, thrust her into high-stakes negotiations with historical societies and the Blackwood family descendants, and ultimately lead to revelations that would forever change her understanding of life, death, and the thin veil between them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The eviction notice arrived on a frigid Monday morning, tucked between a final utility bill and a credit card statement, as if its life-shattering contents were just another piece of ordinary mail. Notice of eviction. 30 days to vacate premises. Eleanor Fraser stared at the bold red letters, feeling her world collapse as she stood in the small kitchen of her suburban apartment. Through the window, she could see the barren winter landscape, gray and unforgiving like her future had suddenly become. "Not now," Eleanor whispered, scanning the document for any possible exception or extension. There wasn't one. The entire apartment complex had been sold to developers planning luxury condominiums. All residents had 1 month to find new housing. No exceptions, no extensions. At 58, Eleanor hadn't imagined she would be here, a widow with a background in library sciences, recently forced into early retirement when budget cuts eliminated her position at the local community college library, and now facing homelessness in a rental market that seemed designed to exclude people exactly like her. She placed the eviction notice on the counter and took a deep breath, mentally calculating her options. Her savings had dwindled to just under $600 after months of medical bills and funeral expenses. Her sister lived overseas and was dealing with health issues of her own. Friends had already assisted as much as they could during the initial months after James' death. Eleanor moved to the living room window, gazing out at the neighborhood where she'd lived for the past decade. For 15 years, it had been the backdrop to her marriage with James, a place filled with small joys and shared dreams that now seemed as distant as the stars. The photos on the wall chronicled their life together, hiking trips, their small garden, holiday gatherings with friends who had become family. She picked up the framed photograph of James and herself on their wedding day. His academic robes, contrasting with her simple cream dress. They'd met at the university where they both worked. He as a history professor, she as a research librarian. "What would you do now, James?" she asked the silent image. There was no answer, of course, just the ticking of the clock marking time in an apartment that would soon no longer be hers. That night, after a simple dinner she could barely taste, Eleanor opened her laptop and began the desperate search for affordable housing. The numbers on the screen mocked her. 1-bedroom apartments rented for nearly twice what she currently paid. Application fees alone would quickly deplete what remained of her savings. Every listing demanded proof of income 3 times the monthly. Rent impossible on her meager retirement benefits that barely covered groceries and essential expenses. She expanded her search radius, looking at towns farther from the city center, places with longer commutes to potential part-time jobs, areas with higher crime rates, anywhere that might have anything she could afford. Each option seemed worse than the last. By 1:30 a.m., desperation drove her to search bankruptcy auctions, foreclosed properties, abandoned buildings, distressed real estate being liquidated to recoup debts. Most were dilapidated houses requiring massive renovations or vacant lots. In remote areas, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, and then she saw it. Former Oakwood Manor Estate. Minimum bid $450. Sold as is. Property requires significant renovation. The listing included only 6 photographs. The imposing Victorian mansion with its weathered facade and peeling paint. The grand entrance hall with its dusty chandelier. The library with empty bookshelves and a massive fireplace. An overgrown garden with a crumbling fountain. The sweeping staircase leading to the upper floors. And a distant view showing the property's 3 acres of neglected grounds. Eleanor almost scrolled past it. What would she do with a deteriorating mansion? But something about the dignified decay of the once grand home called to her. She clicked on the listing for more information. The description was sparse. Former Oakwood Manor Estate, built 1887, 8,500 square feet main residence, plus carriage house 1,200 square feet. Property includes all remaining fixtures. Structure requires significant renovation. No utilities currently connected. Historical designation pending. Property sold as is. Known locally as Blackwood Manor after its original owner, railroad magnate Cornelius Blackwood. Eleanor's exhausted mind began to calculate improbable possibilities. Even if the mansion itself was uninhabitable, perhaps the carriage house could be made livable with some work. The historical designation meant there would be restrictions on modifications, but it also meant certain tax benefits for restoration efforts. It was insane. She was a retired librarian, not a contractor or engineer. The property was located in Millfield, a small town about 40 miles from her current apartment, far enough to feel isolated, but still within reach of potential employment. And yet, what if this was her only option? What if $500 was the price of never having to worry about a landlord's whims again? This is absolutely crazy, she told herself, closing the laptop. But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the idea refused to fade. By morning, what had seemed like midnight madness had crystallized into her best, perhaps only option for housing security. Eleanor withdrew $500 from the bank, nearly everything she had left, and drove her aging Toyota Corolla to the county courthouse, rehearsing arguments to convince herself this wasn't the most desperate gamble of her life. The county courthouse was an imposing stone building with wide marble steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Eleanor arrived 30 minutes early, clutching her bitter registration papers and trying to look more confident than she felt. The auction room was already half filled with people in business attire, professional investors and developers who did this regularly. "First auction?" asked a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, noticing Eleanor nervously adjusting her bitter paddle. Eleanor nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "We all start somewhere," the woman said, introducing herself as Rebecca Sullivan. "I've been attending these auctions for over 15 years. Looking for anything specific today?" "Actually, yes," Eleanor admitted. "The old Oakwood Manor Estate." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "Interesting choice. Those historical properties can be challenging, but that mansion has good bones. What are you planning to do with it?" "Live in it," Eleanor said, then quickly added, "at least in the carriage house first, then gradually work on the main house." Instead of laughing, Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Makes more sense than you might think. That property has stood for over a century. The construction is solid and the location is quite beautiful. The hard part is utilities and making it properly livable." "I'm a retired librarian," Eleanor said, "with some basic renovation skills from helping my late husband with projects over the years. I know it's unconventional, but I'm out of conventional options." Unconventional is how the county had attempted to find preservation partners, but had been unsuccessful due to the extent of the needed repairs. "It's got quite a history," the clerk advised. "Locals say it's haunted." They call it the Whispering House because people claim to hear conversations when no one's there. You might want a thorough inspection. These old structures sometimes have structural issues that aren't immediately visible. By noon, Eleanor Fraser, widow, retired librarian, and now owner of a supposedly haunted Victorian mansion, clutched a set of keys and property deed in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "Congratulations," Rebecca said, finding her in the courthouse hallway. "That's quite an adventure you're embarking on." "I'm still not sure if I'm brilliant or desperate," Eleanor admitted. "Sometimes those qualities are two sides of the same coin," Rebecca replied with a wink. "Here's my card. I've done some unusual renovations over the years, including converting an old schoolhouse into a home. Call me if you need advice or contractor recommendations." Eleanor thanked her and headed directly to her car. She couldn't wait to see her property up close. The drive took her along increasingly rural roads, past farms and small woodland areas, until she reached the rusted wrought iron gates of Oakwood Manor. The gates hung slightly ajar, as if the property had been waiting for her arrival. The gravel driveway was overgrown with weeds, but still passable as Eleanor's Corolla crunched slowly toward the mansion that now belonged to her. The Oakwood Manor estate stood proudly against the winter sky, its Victorian architecture a testament to a bygone era of wealth and craftsmanship. The three-story structure featured a central tower with a widow's walk, multiple chimneys, and wraparound porches on both the first and second floors. The pale yellow paint was peeling badly, and several shutters hung askew, but the grandeur remained unmistakable. Using the key from the auction, Eleanor unlocked the massive front door with its etched glass panels. The smell hit her first, the distinctive scent of a long-abandoned space. Dust, old wood, and something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Sunlight streamed through dirty windows, illuminating floating dust particles and casting long shadows across the parquet floor of the entrance hall. The grand foyer featured a sweeping staircase with an intricately carved banister, rising to a gallery that overlooked the entrance. Tarnished brass wall sconces lined the walls, and an enormous crystal chandelier, now draped in cobwebs, hung from the high ceiling. Doorways led to various rooms, a formal parlor to the right, a dining room to the left, and straight ahead, the library she had seen in the photographs. Eleanor moved slowly through the first floor, trying to process the magnitude of what she had purchased. The parlor contained furniture draped in dusty sheet sofas, chairs, and tables that had been abandoned along with the house. The dining room featured a massive mahogany table with 12 chairs, a china cabinet still holding delicate porcelain, and heavy velvet drapes that had once framed the tall windows. The kitchen was a mix of periods clearly renovated sometime in the 1950s with mint green appliances, then partially updated again in the 1980s with newer countertops. A butler's pantry connected the kitchen to the dining room, its shelves still lined with crystal glassware covered in a thick layer of dust. But it was the library that drew Eleanor most strongly. As a lifelong librarian, she couldn't resist the allure of the book-lined room, even if the shelves now stood mostly empty. The few remaining volumes were leather-bound classics, overlooked or forgotten when the house was cleared. The library featured a massive stone fireplace, comfortable reading chairs, and a large desk positioned near windows that overlooked what had once been formal gardens. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard and penetrating eyes, Cornelius Blackwood himself, Eleanor assumed, the original owner whose name still clung to the property in local memory. As she stood admiring the craftsmanship of the carved wooden bookshelves, Eleanor felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees in an instant. Goosebumps rose on her arms, and her breath caught in her throat. "Hello?" she called out, feeling foolish even as the word left her lips. There was no response, of course. She was alone in the abandoned mansion. And yet, She couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, of not being entirely alone among the dusty grandeur of Oakwood Manor. Trying to ignore the unsettling feeling, Eleanor continued her exploration, climbing the grand staircase to the second floor. The upper level contained numerous bedrooms, each with its own distinct character. The master suite occupied the entire east wing, featuring a sitting room, massive bedroom with a four-poster bed, and a surprisingly modern bathroom that must have been renovated shortly before the house was abandoned. 4 additional bedrooms occupied the remainder of the second floor, along with 2 more bathrooms. The third floor, accessed by a narrower staircase, contained what had once been servants' quarters, smaller rooms with simpler furnishings, now musty and thick with dust. Finally, Eleanor ventured to the carriage house behind the main mansion. This smaller building, originally designed to house horses and carriages, had been converted into living quarters at some point. It contained a simple apartment with a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. While also in need of cleaning and repairs, it seemed significantly more manageable than the main house. This could work, Eleanor murmured to herself mentally, calculating what it would take to make the carriage house habitable. New plumbing, electrical updates, fresh paint challenging, but not impossible, especially if she could secure a small loan against the property itself. As the winter daylight began to fade, Eleanor returned to the main house for one final look before leaving. Standing in the entrance hall, gazing up at the grand staircase, she felt that strange sensation again, the temperature dropping suddenly, the air becoming heavy with something more than just dust and abandonment. And then she heard it so faint she might have imagined it a whisper. The words were indistinct, but the sound was unmistakable. A human voice, soft and urgent, coming from somewhere deep within the house. "Hello?" Eleanor called again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her. She stood perfectly still, straining to hear. Nothing. Just the settling of an old house, she told herself. Just the wind finding its way through cracks in the ancient windows. Just her imagination, heightened by the clerk's comments about hauntings and whispers. Yet as she locked the front door and walked back to her car, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Oakwood Manor was not as abandoned as it appeared. That somehow, in some way she couldn't yet understand, the house itself had been waiting for her. When Eleanor returned to her apartment that evening, the reality of her situation crystallized with stark clarity. She had just purchased a reportedly haunted, dilapidated mansion with her last $550. What had seemed like desperate inspiration now felt like potential madness. She spent the night researching Oakwood Manor, finding scattered information about its history and the Blackwood family who had built it. Cornelius Blackwood had made his fortune in railroads during the late 1800s, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the region. The mansion had been completed in 1887, showcasing his success with every ornate detail. Historical accounts mentioned his mysterious disappearance in 1892. He had simply vanished from the property, leaving behind his considerable fortune and sprawling business interests. Some reports claimed he had absconded with embezzled funds from his railroad company, while others suggested foul play, perhaps at the hands of business rivals. The mystery had never been solved. More intriguing were the local legends that had grown around the property. Numerous articles from the local newspaper mentioned strange occurrences at Oakwood Manor, unexplained sounds, sudden temperature changes, objects moving without explanation. The mansion had changed hands several times over the decades, but no owner had stayed long. The last Blackwood descendant, an elderly woman named Margaret, had lived there alone until her death 3 years ago. Eleanor's research shifted to practical concerns. What would be required to make the carriage house habitable? How to address utilities that had been disconnected for years? What grants might be available for historical properties? The answers were sobering. Even modest renovations would cost thousands of dollars she didn't have. Yet as she considered her options, Eleanor realized she had already made her choice. The eviction from her apartment was proceeding regardless. The mansion, however daunting, represented her only chance at housing security. Tomorrow she would return to Oakwood Manor, her manor, and begin the overwhelming task of creating a home from beautiful decay. The following morning, Eleanor packed her car with cleaning supplies, basic tools, and as much of her clothing as would fit. She had arranged to store most of her furniture with a friend temporarily, hoping to retrieve it once the carriage house was livable. With determination overcoming her apprehension, she drove toward her new life at Oakwood Manor. Daylight revealed details of the property she had missed during yesterday's exploration. The grounds, though wildly overgrown, showed hints of once beautiful gardens, stone pathways winding through tangled vegetation, the skeletal remains of a gazebo barely visible through encroaching vines, and a small pond now choked with algae. Eleanor began her work in the carriage house, attacking decades of dust and grime with methodical determination. Years of library work had taught her that seemingly insurmountable tasks became manageable when broken into smaller components. She focused on creating one habitable room at a time, starting with the bedroom where she could place a sleeping bag, until proper furniture became possible. By late afternoon, her arms ached from scrubbing and her clothes were filthy, but the small bedroom had been transformed. The wooden floors gleamed after thorough cleaning, the windows sparkled, allowing winter sunlight to flood the space, and the walls, while desperately needing paint, were at least free of cobwebs and dust. As twilight approached, Eleanor realized she needed to check into a budget motel for the night. The carriage house still had no running water or electricity. Those would require professional help and permits from the county. She locked up the property and drove toward town, her mind already planning the next day's tasks. The following morning, Eleanor visited the Millfield County offices to inquire about reconnecting utilities and any permits she might need. The clerk at the Public Works Department seemed surprised by her request. "Oakwood Manor? You're the one who bought it?" The middle-aged woman peered at Eleanor over her reading glasses. "Most folks around here wouldn't go near that place after dark, because of the haunting rumors?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her tone casual. The clerk nodded solemnly. "My cousin worked as a housekeeper for old Miss Margaret before she passed. Said she'd hear conversations coming from empty rooms. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Cold spots in the middle of summer. Miss Margaret wasn't bothered, said it was just family watching over the place." Eleanor smiled politely. "Well, I haven't noticed anything unusual. Just a lot of cleaning to do." The clerk handed her the necessary forms for utility connections. "Just be careful up there, especially in the main house." Miss Margaret refused to go into certain rooms during her last years, said they weren't welcoming anymore. That afternoon, Eleanor returned to the mansion with a renewed sense of both determination and caution. While waiting for the utility companies to schedule connections, she decided to continue exploring the main house, documenting what she found to create a prioritized renovation plan. The mansion seemed different in daylight, less intimidating, though no less imposing. She began a systematic room-by-room assessment, making notes about structural issues, water damage, and potential historical features worth preserving. Library drew her back like a magnet. Of all the rooms in the mansion, this one seemed most preserved, as if time had touched it more gently than the rest. The remaining books were primarily leather-bound classics and historical references, many featuring extensive handwritten notes in the margins. As a librarian, Eleanor couldn't help but be charmed by these personal annotations, glimpses into the thoughts of previous readers. She was examining a particularly interesting notation in a volume about local history when that strange sensation returned. The sudden temperature drop, the feeling of presence. This time, however, something new happened. The heavy curtains at the library windows swayed gently, though no windows were open. A book on the shelf directly behind her fell to the floor with a thud. Eleanor turned quickly, heart racing. "Hello? Is someone here?" Silence answered her, but the air felt charged, expectant. She took a deep breath. "I'm Eleanor. I've bought this house. I'm trying to restore it." The words felt foolish spoken aloud to an empty room, yet something compelled her to continue. "I'm not here to damage anything or change what matters. I just need a place to live." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, another book tipped forward from the shelf and fell open on the floor. Eleanor approached cautiously, kneeling to examine it. The book had fallen open to a specific page, an architectural drawing of Oakwood Manor, including details that weren't visible in the actual structure. The drawing showed a small room behind the library fireplace, accessible through what appeared to be a hidden entrance in the bookshelf to the left of the hearth. Eleanor stared at the diagram, then at the bookshelf indicated. Unlike the other shelves in the room, this one appeared to be built differently, with heavier construction and subtle details that distinguished it from its neighbors. "Is that what you're trying to show me?" she asked quietly. "A hidden room?" The temperature dropped further, and Eleanor's breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. Taking this as confirmation, she approached the bookshelf cautiously. According to the diagram, there should be a mechanism, a trigger, or lever that would reveal the entrance. Eleanor examined the shelf carefully, running her fingers along the ornate woodwork, searching for anything unusual. Near the bottom, her fingers detected a slight depression in what appeared to be a decorative rosette. Heart pounding, she pressed firmly. With a soft click, the entire bookshelf shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap at its edge. Eleanor inserted her fingers into the space and pulled gently. The bookshelf swung outward like a door, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "This is incredible," Eleanor whispered, reaching for her phone to use as a flashlight. The passage was tight but navigable, extending about 6 feet before opening into a small room, exactly as shown in the architectural drawing. The hidden chamber was approximately 10 feet square, with a low ceiling that would force a tall person to stoop. Unlike the abandoned library outside, this room showed signs of deliberate preservation. A small desk occupied one wall, covered with papers and ledgers. Filing cabinets lined another wall, and a large safe dominated the corner, an old-fashioned model with a combination dial and heavy steel door. Eleanor's flashlight beam revealed a layer of dust covering everything, but far less than in the rest of the mansion. This room had been accessed more recently than the others, perhaps by Margaret Blackwood before her death. The papers on the desk appeared to be business documents, financial records, property deeds, and correspondence related to Blackwood Railroad Enterprises. Eleanor examined them carefully, her librarian's training in archival preservation making her cautious about handling the aged documents. One letter in particular caught her attention, dated November 15, 1892, just days before Cornelius Blackwood's disappearance. It was addressed to his lawyer and marked "Confidential" in bold script across the top. "In light of recent threats and my suspicion of imminent danger, I have taken necessary precautions to secure my family's future," the letter read. "The majority of my liquid assets have been converted and secured in the vault. The combination is known only to myself, though I have left the necessary clues where only family might find them. Should anything happen to me, ensure this information reaches my wife and son exclusively." Eleanor stared at the letter, its implications enormous. Cornelius Blackwood had hidden his wealth somewhere on the property in a vault only accessible through clues he had left behind. And somehow, the presence in this house, the whispers, the cold spots, the falling books, was trying to guide her to this discovery. As if confirming her thoughts, the temperature in the small room plummeted further. Eleanor shivered, watching her breath form clouds in the beam of her flashlight. "Are you Cornelius Blackwood?" she asked softly. "Are you trying to show me something?" No audible response came, but the papers on the desk rustled slightly, as if disturbed by an unfelt breeze. One document shifted, sliding partially over the others, a floor plan of the mansion's ground floor with a small X marked in what appeared to be the cellar. Eleanor's hands trembled as she picked up the floor plan. The vault is in the cellar? Again, no audible answer, but the chill intensified briefly before gradually warming. Eleanor carefully photographed the letter, the floor plan, and several other key documents with her phone before returning everything to its original position. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to maintain the room as she had found it, but something told her discretion was important. Exiting the hidden room, she carefully closed the bookshelf door behind her, ensuring it clicked securely into place. The library felt warmer now, the oppressive chill completely gone. Eleanor stood for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Either she was experiencing an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and desperation, or she had just been guided to hidden documents by the ghost of Cornelius Blackwood. Neither option seemed particularly rational, yet here she was, holding photographs of century-old documents that pointed to a hidden fortune. Eleanor left the main house and returned to work on the carriage house, her mind spinning with possibilities and questions. If Blackwood's letter was genuine, there could be significant wealth hidden somewhere on the property wealth that might legally belong to her as the current owner. But the ethical implications troubled her. If there were living Blackwood descendants who weren't aware of this hidden wealth, didn't they deserve to know? The next day brought a visit from the county inspector, necessary for reconnecting utilities. The middle-aged man seemed impressed by her progress on the carriage house. Most people who buy these old places have grand plans, but no follow-through, he commented, examining the wiring. You've made good progress here. Thank you, Eleanor replied. I'm trying to be methodical about it. The inspector nodded approvingly. The electrical system in this building was updated in the 1990s, so it's not as outdated as the main house. You'll need some repairs, but nothing major. Water and sewage connections are also in reasonable shape. As he completed his inspection, the man grew curious. Mind if I ask why you bought this place? Most people are put off by the rumors. Eleanor smiled noncommittally. I needed affordable housing, and I've always loved old architecture. Well, you got a bargain price, that's for sure. Property this size would normally go for 20 times what you paid, even in this condition. He closed his clipboard. Just be careful in the main house. The structure is generally sound. They built these places to last, but there are some water damage issues in the east wing that should be addressed before you spend much time there. After the inspector left, promising utilities would be connected within the week, Eleanor returned to her research. Using her phone's hotspot to access the internet, she searched for information about the Blackwood family, trying to determine if there were any living descendants besides the recently deceased Margaret. Her search yielded limited results. Cornelius Blackwood had one son, Edward, who had inherited the railroad business after his father's disappearance. Edward had 3 children, but the family's wealth had apparently diminished considerably during the Great Depression. By the 1950s, only one branch of the family remained in the area Margaret's line. And according to the county clerk, Margaret had died without heirs. This information eased Eleanor's ethical concerns somewhat. If there were no living Blackwood descendants, then any hidden assets on the property would rightfully belong to her as the current owner. Still, she decided she would make a more thorough search for possible distant relatives before making any final decisions about Blackwood's hidden wealth, assuming she could even find it. With utilities scheduled for connection, Eleanor focused on making the carriage house habitable. She drove to a nearby discount furniture store and purchased the essentials: a mattress and bed frame, a small sofa, a basic dining table with 2 chairs, and a desk where she could continue her research. The expenditure depleted her remaining funds, but it was necessary if she was to avoid extended hotel stays. The following days fell into a pattern. Eleanor would work on cleaning and repairs in the carriage house each morning, making steady progress toward a livable space. Afternoons were spent exploring the main house, particularly focusing on the cellar where Blackwood's floor plan had marked the potential location of the vault. The cellar was accessible through a door in the kitchen, leading to stone steps that descended into the earth beneath the mansion. Unlike the damp, dirt-floored cellar Eleanor had expected, this space was surprisingly finished, with brick walls, a concrete floor, and even some remnants of electric lighting. The area had clearly been used for storage old furniture, trunks filled with clothing and linens, crates of household items, and racks that had once held wine bottles. The space was extensive, running beneath much of the main house, divided into several rooms with arched brick doorways between them. Eleanor carefully compared her photograph of the floor plan to the actual cellar, trying to determine which section corresponded to the marked X. The challenge was that the floor plan didn't include much detail for the cellar, just a basic outline with few identifying features. After several days of methodical exploration, she noticed something odd about one section of brick wall in the northeast corner of the cellar. Unlike the rest of the walls, which were uniform in their construction, this section appeared slightly different. The mortar pattern was subtly distinct, as if it had been constructed separately from the rest. Eleanor tapped experimentally on different sections of the wall. Most produced the solid thunk of thick masonry, but one section approximately 3 feet square sounded hollow behind it. Excitement building, she examined the wall more closely, looking for any mechanism similar to the one that had revealed the hidden room in the library. Her fingers traced the mortar lines, searching for irregularities. In the center of the suspicious section, she found what she was looking for, a brick that protruded slightly more than its neighbors. When pressed, it recessed into the wall with a soft click. A moment later, the entire section of wall swung inward, revealing a small chamber beyond. Eleanor's heart pounded as she directed her flashlight into the opening. The beam illuminated a space approximately 8 feet square, its walls lined with metal. In the center stood an enormous vault, not just a safe, but a true bank-style vault with a massive circular door and combination lock. "This is it," Eleanor whispered, stepping into the hidden room. "Blackwood's vault." The vault door was imposing solid steel with a complex combination mechanism at its center. A brass plate on the door bore the name Blackwood in elegant script. Eleanor examined the combination lock carefully. It appeared to require 4 numbers between 0 and 100. Even if she could determine the correct numbers, how would she know the order? The possible combinations were astronomical. Eleanor photographed the vault from several angles, then reluctantly left the hidden chamber. She would need to find those clues Blackwood mentioned in his letter, the ones only family might find. As she climbed the cellar stairs back to the kitchen, a thought occurred to her. The presence, whether Blackwood's ghost or some manifestation of her own subconscious, guided her to the hidden room in the library and eventually to the vault. Perhaps it would help her find the combination as well. "If you can hear me," Eleanor said aloud, standing in the kitchen, "I found the vault, but I need help with the combination. Where should I look for clues?" For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, a door across the kitchen leading to what Eleanor had identified as a butler's pantry swung open slowly. Taking this as her answer, she walked toward it, flashlight in hand. The butler's pantry was a narrow room with built-in cabinets and shelving designed for storing serving dishes and linens. Eleanor had glanced inside before, but hadn't explored it thoroughly. Now she examined each shelf and cabinet systematically. In the back of a lower cabinet, behind stacks of tarnished silver serving trays, she found what appeared to be a false panel. When removed, it revealed a small alcove containing a leather-bound book. The book was a personal journal, its pages Filled with handwriting she recognized from the marginal notes in the library books Cornelius Blackwood's distinctive script. Eleanor carefully opened it, mindful of its age. The journal detailed Blackwood's growing paranoia in the months leading up to his disappearance. He wrote of business rivals attempting to undermine his railroad empire, of threats against his family, of suspicions that even his closest associates might be working against him. More importantly, scattered throughout the entries were references to securing the future and a legacy that will endure. One entry in particular caught Eleanor's attention. I have completed the final transfer. All liquid assets now secure in the vault. The combination I have derived from the four most significant dates in my life, the foundation of all that matters. Only blood would know these without being told. They are recorded where I began and where I will end, in the pages that chronicle my journey. Eleanor frowned, trying to interpret this cryptic message. The pages that chronicle my journey. Could he mean his autobiography? Was there such a book in the library? Or perhaps a family Bible recording important dates? As night fell, Eleanor returned to the carriage house, which was now minimally habitable with her newly purchased furniture. Tomorrow, the utility companies would reconnect water and electricity. Progress was happening, slow but steady. As she settled onto her new mattress, Eleanor found herself thinking about the strange circumstances that had brought her here. A month ago, she had been a recently widowed retiree facing eviction. Now she was the owner of a historically significant mansion, potentially guided by a ghost, searching for a hidden fortune secured in a vault that hadn't been opened in over a century. If she found Blackwood's wealth, it would transform her future entirely. No more financial insecurity, no more desperate measures. She could restore the mansion to its former glory, create a comfortable home, perhaps even establish some kind of legacy of her own. Yet Eleanor couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Why had the Blackwood presence chosen to guide her? Was it simply because she now owned the property, or was there some other connection she didn't yet understand? And what had really happened to Cornelius Blackwood after he secured his wealth in that hidden vault? As she drifted toward sleep, a whisper seemed to float through the darkness of the carriage. How so faint she couldn't be certain, she hadn't imagined it. Find the portrait. Look behind the eyes. Eleanor woke the next morning with the whispered words lingering in her mind. Find the portrait. Look behind the eyes. She lay still for a moment, considering whether it had been a dream or something more. The morning sunlight streaming through the carriage house windows made the previous night's ghostly encounter feel distant and surreal. Yet the message remained clear in her memory. After a quick breakfast, Eleanor headed to the main house. Drawn to the portrait of Cornelius Blackwood that hung above the library fireplace. In daylight, the painting had a different quality, less intimidating, more human. The railroad tycoon's stern expression and penetrating gaze now seemed to hold hints of sadness, perhaps even resignation. Looking at it from this new perspective, Eleanor wondered if Blackwood had known his fate when he posed for this portrait, if he had already begun hiding his wealth and leaving clues for his family. Standing on a chair to examine the portrait more closely, Eleanor studied the painted eyes. They were remarkably detailed, with subtle variations in color and tiny reflections that gave them lifelike depth. Following her instinct, or perhaps the ghostly guidance, she pressed gently on the right eye. Nothing happened. She tried the left eye, applying slight pressure to the canvas. Still nothing. Frowning, Eleanor stepped back to reconsider. Look behind the eyes, the whisper had said. Perhaps it was meant more literally. Setting the chair aside, she carefully lifted the heavy portrait from its hooks on the wall. The back of the canvas was covered with aged fabric, slightly discolored with time. examining the area where the eyes would be if the canvas were transparent. Eleanor noticed small irregularities in the backing fabric, two circular areas where the material seemed slightly different. Using her pocket knife, she carefully cut along the edge of one circle, peeling back the fabric to reveal a small metal container embedded in the wooden frame. Her hands trembling with excitement, Eleanor extracted the container and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellow with age but still intact. Unfolding it carefully, she found herself looking at a birth certificate, Cornelius Blackwood's birth certificate, dated June 17, 1842. The first number, Eleanor whispered. Understanding dawning. The 4 most significant dates in his life. She quickly checked the second circular area behind the portrait, finding another metal container. This one held a marriage certificate, recording Blackwood's wedding to Elizabeth Hawthorne on May 9, 1870. The second number. Returning the portrait to the wall, Eleanor's mind raced. She had 2 of the 4 dates needed for the vault combination. According to Blackwood's journal, these were dates only family would know, dates that chronicled his journey. Birth and marriage were obvious milestones, but what were the other 2? The utility company trucks arrived then, temporarily interrupting her search. Eleanor spent the next few hours working with the technicians as they restored water and electricity to the carriage house. By late afternoon, she had functioning plumbing, lights, and even heat from the restored furnace. The simple luxury of a hot shower in her own space, however modest, felt like an incredible victory after days of motel bathrooms and makeshift arrangements. Refreshed and reinvigorated, Eleanor returned to the main house, determined to find the remaining dates. The whispered guidance had been accurate about the portrait. Perhaps more would come if she remained receptive. Standing in the entrance hall, she spoke aloud. "I've found 2 dates, birth and marriage. What are the others?" For several moments, nothing happened. Then, a soft creak drew her attention to the staircase. Looking up, she saw nothing unusual, but the creaking continued, moving up the stairs as if invisible feet were ascending to the second floor. Taking this as her cue, Eleanor followed the sound up the grand staircase. The creaking continued along the second-floor hallway, stopping outside one of the bedroom doors, a room she hadn't fully explored yet, assuming it was just another guest bedroom. Opening the door revealed a nursery, preserved despite decades of neglect. A wooden crib stood in the center, surrounded by childhood toys from another era. Shelves held children's books, and a rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. The room had a peaceful quality that the rest of the house seemed to lack, a sense of joy and innocence, preserved in the faded wallpaper and well-loved toys. Eleanor moved slowly through the space, understanding its significance. This must have been the nursery for Blackwood's son, Edward. On a small desk near the window, she found a leather-bound baby book, its pages documenting Edward Blackwood's early years. The first entry, written in what Eleanor now recognized as Cornelius Blackwood's handwriting, recorded Edward's birth on October 3, 1871. The third date, Eleanor murmured, carefully photographing the page with her phone. 3 dates found. 1 remaining. Eleanor carefully closed the baby book and returned it to its place. As she turned to leave the nursery, that familiar chill returned, more pronounced than before. The temperature dropped dramatically, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. "I'm trying to understand," she said softly. 3 dates, birth, marriage, son's birth. What's the 4th? No answer came, but the door to the adjacent bedroom slowly swung open. This room, unlike the cheerful nursery, had a somber quality. Heavy drapes blocked much of the natural light, and the furnishings were formal and austere. It appeared to be a lady's bedroom, delicate vanity table, armoire with traces of feminine clothing still visible, a jewelry box on the bedside table. Understanding came quickly. This must have been Elizabeth Blackwood's room. And if the pattern, of significant dates continued. This room would hold the date of her death. Eleanor moved to the bedside table, opening the small drawer. Inside lay a prayer book, its pages well worn with use. On the first page, an inscription read, "In loving memory of Elizabeth Hawthorne Blackwood. Returned to God's embrace February 12, 1883. The fourth date." Eleanor whispered, completing the set. Birth, marriage, son's birth, wife's death. Milestones of his life. She now had all 4 dates: 6/1/7/1842, the 9th of May 1870, the 3rd of October 1871, and the 12th of February 1883. But in what order should they be entered into the vault's combination lock? The journal had mentioned the order that chronicles my journey. The most logical interpretation would be chronological order: birth, marriage, son's birth, wife's death. Converting these to the format needed for the vault numbers between 0 and 100, Eleanor realized the month and day would work perfectly. June 17th became 6-17. May 9th became 5-9. October 3rd became 10-3. February 12th became 2-12. With growing excitement, Eleanor returned to the kitchen and descended into the cellar, making her way to the hidden vault room she had discovered. Standing before the massive steel door, she carefully turned the combination dial, following the sequence: right to 6, left to 17, right to 5, left to 9, right to 10, left to 3, right to 2, left to 12. As she completed the final number, a heavy, metallic clunk emanated from within the door mechanism. Holding her breath, Eleanor turned the large handle. With surprising smoothness for its age, the vault door swung open, revealing the space beyond. The beam of her flashlight illuminated a treasure trove beyond her wildest expectations. The vault was approximately 15 feet square, its walls lined with shelves holding neatly organized containers. In the center stood several large trunks, their lids closed but not locked. Eleanor stepped inside, her flashlight revealing the contents of the nearest shelf: rows of small wooden boxes, each labeled with a date and location. Opening one at random, she gasped at the sight of gold coins nestled in velvet lining double eagles, the $20 gold pieces that had been standard currency in the late 19th century. The next shelf held similar boxes containing jewelry, diamond necklaces, emerald rings, pearl earrings, and more. Another section contained stock certificates and property deeds, all neatly bundled and labeled. Moving to the trunks in the center of the vault, Eleanor opened the first one to find it filled with stacks of currency, not the modern bills she was accustomed to, but the larger, more ornate notes of the late 1800s, even accounting for inflation. And currency changes, the amount was staggering. The second trunk contained silver bars, each stamped with the weight and purity. The third held documents, journals, letters, and ledgers that appeared to detail Blackwood's business dealings and personal affairs. In the far corner of the vault, a small desk held what looked like Blackwood's final journal, a leather-bound volume with his name embossed on the cover. Eleanor opened it carefully, finding an entry dated November 20th, 1892, just days before his reported disappearance. "The threats have intensified," the entry read. "Henderson's men were seen near the property yesterday. I can no longer risk staying here, but neither can I leave my family unprotected. All arrangements are complete. My new identity awaits in Chicago. The vault contains everything needed to sustain the family for generations. Edward knows nothing of this plan." Eleanor sat at the small desk, stunned by what she had discovered. Cornelius Blackwood hadn't vanished mysteriously, he had deliberately disappeared, assuming a new identity to escape threats against him and his family. He had left his fortune hidden in this vault, expecting his son to eventually find it using the clues he had left behind. But according to her research, Edward Blackwood had never claimed the fortune. Historical records indicated that the Blackwood family fortunes had declined in the decades following Cornelius's disappearance, suggesting Edward had never found the vault. The wealth had remained hidden for over a century, untouched and forgotten, until now. Eleanor's mind whirled with the implications. By conservative estimate, the vault contained millions, possibly tens of millions in gold, jewelry, currency, and securities. Some of the items would have significant historical value beyond their inherent worth. The documents alone would be invaluable to historians studying the railroad era and Gilded Age business practices. And legally, it all appeared to belong to her as the property owner. The county auction had transferred ownership of the estate, including all fixtures and contents, to Eleanor. There were apparently no living Blackwood heirs to make a claim. As this realization settled over her, Eleanor felt the temperature in the vault drop suddenly. The familiar chill returned, but this time with an intensity that made her shiver violently. Her flashlight flickered, then stabilized. "I understand now," she said aloud, addressing the presence she could feel but not see. "You've been guiding me to this all along. You wanted the truth to be known, the fortune to be found." The flashlight flickered again, then went out completely, plunging the vault into darkness. Before panic could take hold, it illuminated again, but now directed itself, without Eleanor touching it, to shine on a particular document on the desk. A letter, addressed simply, to the finder. With trembling hands, Eleanor picked up the letter and began to read. "If you are reading this, you have succeeded where others have failed. You have followed the path I laid, solved the puzzle I created, and discovered what I concealed from those who sought to take it by force. I do not know who you are or when you have found this place. Perhaps you are my son, having finally understood the clues I left behind. Perhaps you are a distant descendant of the Blackwood line. Or perhaps you are a stranger, someone with no connection to my blood, but with the perception to hear what others could not. Whoever you are, know this. This fortune was amassed through honest labor and shrewd investment, but its purpose was never mere wealth. It was security for those I loved, protection against an uncertain world, a foundation upon which dreams could be built without fear. I ask only this of you, finder, honor that purpose. Let this discovery change your life, yes, but also use it to change the lives of others. Build, create, protect. Continue the legacy not of wealth itself, but of what wealth, wisely used, can accomplish. With gratitude for your perseverance. Cornelius Blackwood, November 21, 1892. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the letter in her hand seeming to connect her across time to the man who had written it, the man whose presence, somehow, had guided her to this moment. The implications were overwhelming. This discovery would completely transform her circumstances from near homelessness to extraordinary wealth in the span of a few weeks. The financial security she had lost with Jane's death and her forced retirement was not only restored but multiplied beyond imagination. Yet with this sudden shift came responsibility. Blackwood's letter made that clear. This wasn't just about her personal security. It was about purpose, legacy, and impact beyond herself. As the reality of her situation settled in, Eleanor made a decision. She would secure the vault, consult with appropriate experts, legal, financial, historical, and proceed carefully. This discovery was too significant to be handled impulsively. She carefully photographed key documents, then closed and locked the vault, ensuring the hidden entrance was properly concealed. Tomorrow she would begin making discreet inquiries about authenticating and valuing historical items, establishing proper security for the property, and consulting with an attorney about her legal position regarding the found assets. Walking back to the carriage house that evening, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the material discovery, but for the strange journey that had led her here. Her desperate gamble at the county auction, which had seemed like rock bottom at the time, had actually been the first step towards something extraordinary. The mansion stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, its imposing Victorian architecture no longer seeming foreboding but protective, a guardian of secrets that had waited patiently for the right person to discover them. Inside the carriage house, with its newly connected electricity casting warm light on her modest furnishings, Eleanor began making notes about next steps. The practical challenges ahead were considerable: securing the property, authenticating and valuing the contents of the vault, addressing tax implications, establishing proper banking relationships, and developing a thoughtful plan for restoration and future use of the estate. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay deeper questions about purpose and responsibility. Blackwood's letter had framed his fortune not as an end in itself, but as a means of foundation for building, creating, and protecting. How would she honor that perspective? What legacy would she build with this unexpected gift? As she pondered these questions, Eleanor became aware of a change in the atmosphere of the carriage house. The familiar chill returned, but gentler now, not the intense cold that had sometimes accompanied the presence in the mansion, but a cool freshness, like a spring breeze through an open window. "Thank you," she said softly to the empty room, "for guiding me, for trusting me with this." No audible response came, but the breeze seemed to circle her once before dissipating entirely. The presence was gone, its purpose fulfilled, its message delivered, its legacy now in new hands. That night, Eleanor slept deeply for the first time since James' death. No dreams disturbed her rest, no anxiety about the future interrupted her sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of the carriage house, illuminating possibilities that hadn't existed just days before. The practical woman in her knew that significant challenges lay ahead. Wealth brought its own complications, and the transition from near poverty to substantial assets would require careful navigation. But beneath these practical concerns lay a profound sense of purpose, a feeling that this extraordinary turn of events wasn't random chance but meaningful connection. The widow who had spent her last dollars on a supposedly haunted mansion had been guided to not just financial security, but to a mission to honor the legacy of a man who had faced his own challenges more than a century earlier, who had protected what mattered most to him and created a path for someone in the future to continue what he had begun. As Eleanor prepared for the day ahead, she felt a quiet confidence replacing the desperation that had driven her just weeks before. Whatever challenges came next, she would face them with the same resourcefulness and courage that had brought her this far, the same qualities that had allowed her to hear whispers others had missed and follow clues others had overlooked. The haunted mansion that had seemed like her last resort had become the foundation for her new beginning, and the ghosts that had frightened away previous owners had become her unexpected guides, connecting past to present in a legacy that would now continue through her. The following morning, Eleanor's first priority was securing the vault's contents. After careful consideration, she contacted Rebecca Sullivan, the experienced auction-goer who had shown her kindness at the county courthouse. Rebecca's professional background, Eleanor had learned, was in estate management and historical preservation, exactly the expertise she now needed. Over coffee in Eleanor's newly habitable carriage house, she shared her extraordinary discovery, showing Rebecca the photographs of key documents rather than revealing the vault's location. "If these are authentic, and they certainly appear to be, you've made an incredible historical find," Rebecca said, examining the images carefully. "Beyond the monetary value, which is substantial, the historical significance of Blackwood's personal papers is immeasurable." "I'm overwhelmed by the responsibility," Eleanor admitted. "I need guidance on proper authentication, security, preservation, everything, really." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "I can help connect you with the right experts, but we need to be strategic about this. Discoveries of this magnitude attract attention, not all of it welcome." With Rebecca's assistance, Eleanor developed a careful plan. First, they would consult with a trusted attorney to establish Eleanor's legal ownership of the found assets. Next, they would arrange for professional authentication and valuation of selected items from the vault. Only then would they begin the process of proper conservation and security arrangements. Rebecca introduced Eleanor to Catherine Winters, an attorney specializing in property law and historical finds. Meeting in Catherine's office in the nearby city, Eleanor presented the documentation from the county auction, along with photographs of selected documents from the vault. "The legal position is actually quite straightforward," Catherine explained after reviewing the materials. "The auction terms explicitly transferred ownership of the property, including all fixtures and contents, to you. Since there are no known Blackwood heirs making claims, and the vault was an integral part of the property, its contents legally belong to you." "Even something this valuable?" Eleanor asked. "Value doesn't change the legal principle," Catherine confirmed. "Think of it like purchasing an old painting at a garage sale that turns out to be worth millions. The seller's lack of knowledge about its value doesn't invalidate the transaction." With her legal position clarified, Eleanor moved forward with authentication. Under Rebecca's guidance, she selected a respected historical authentication firm with experience handling sensitive, high-value discoveries. Their expert, Dr. Thomas Bennett, agreed to visit Oakwood Manor under strict confidentiality. Dr. Bennett's examination of selected items from the vault confirmed what Eleanor already believed: the documents, currency, and artifacts were genuine pieces from the late 19th century. His preliminary assessment placed the combined value in the tens of millions, potentially over $200 million when accounting for the historical significance of unique items. The Blackwood journals alone are museum-quality historical artifacts, Dr. Bennett explained, handling the leather-bound volumes with reverent care. They provide unprecedented insight into Gilded Age business practices and the personal motivations of one of the era's most enigmatic figures. The gold coins and currency, while valuable for their precious metal content, carried even greater worth as collector's items. The jewelry, much of it custom designed for Elizabeth Blackwood by prominent jewelers of the era, represented both material and artistic value. The stock certificates and property deeds required further research to determine their current status, but many appeared to represent still existing companies and properties. With authentication confirmed, Eleanor faced a decision about how to proceed. The wealth she had discovered could be liquidated, invested, preserved as historical artifacts, or some combination of these approaches. Blackwood's letter, his guidance to build, create, protect, remained at the forefront of her mind as she considered her options. After extensive consultation with her growing team of advisors, Eleanor developed a comprehensive plan that honored both the letter and spirit of Blackwood's wishes. She would establish a foundation dedicated to historical preservation and community development, funded by a portion of the discovered wealth. The Blackwood Fraser Foundation would support restoration of historical properties, provide housing, security for vulnerable populations, and fund educational initiatives focused on American history. For Oakwood Manor itself, Eleanor envisioned a dual purpose, partly her private residence and partly a carefully managed historical site showcasing the Blackwood legacy and the architectural significance of the Gilded Age mansion. The main house would undergo full restoration, with certain areas open for limited public tours and educational programs. As these plans took shape, Eleanor maintained absolute discretion about the full extent of her discovery. Only her closest advisors knew the true value of what had been found in the vault. To the wider community, she presented herself simply as a preservation enthusiast who had discovered interesting historical documents that enabled her to restore the mansion. This careful approach proved wise when, 3 months after her discovery, A black SUV pulled into the driveway of Oakwood Manor. Two men in expensive suits introduced themselves as representatives of Blackwood Historical Acquisitions, a private company specializing in purchasing artifacts related to 19th-century industrialists. "We understand you've discovered some interest in historical materials related to Cornelius Blackwood," the older man said, handing Eleanor his business card. "Our organization would be very interested in acquiring anything you found at a generous premium, of course." Eleanor studied the card carefully. The company name and logo were professional, but something about the timing and approach felt suspicious. "I'm still cataloging what I found," she replied cautiously. "Mostly architectural plans and personal correspondence. Nothing of significant value." "We'd be happy to assist with that cataloging," the man offered smoothly. "Our experts have extensive experience with Blackwood materials specifically." "Thank you, but I've already engaged local historians," Eleanor replied. "If I decide to sell anything, I'll certainly keep your offer in mind." The men exchanged glances. "Perhaps we could see what you've discovered so far. Even preliminary findings can be quite valuable to serious collectors." Eleanor's instincts, sharpened by months of navigating her extraordinary circumstances, signaled danger. These men weren't ordinary collectors or legitimate historians. They had somehow learned of her discovery, perhaps through rumors from the authentication process, and were probing for information. "I'm afraid that's not possible today," she said firmly. "The materials are secured off-site during the renovation. I'd be happy to contact you when the cataloging is complete." After the men reluctantly departed, Eleanor immediately called Rebecca and Catherine, describing the encounter in detail. "We expected this might happen," Catherine said grimly. "Discoveries of this magnitude rarely remain completely secret. The good news is they seem to know only that you've found something, not what or where. We should accelerate our security upgrades," Rebecca added, "and perhaps expedite the transfer of the most valuable items to secure storage." That evening, Eleanor worked with a specialized security team to relocate selected items from the vault to safety deposit boxes and museum-quality storage facilities. The team, vetted thoroughly by Catherine, included former museum security experts who understood both the value and the vulnerability of historical artifacts. As she watched the carefully packed crates being loaded into unmarked vehicles, Eleanor reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. From facing eviction to orchestrating the secure transport of millions in historical treasures, the transformation was almost too vast to comprehend. Yet through all these changes, Eleanor had maintained a clear vision, guided by Blackwood's words: build, create, protect. Each decision, from the establishment of the foundation to the restoration plans for the mansion, aligned with that tripartite mission. The following weeks brought increasing activity to Oakwood Manor. Restoration specialists began work on the main house, focusing first on structural integrity and preservation of original features. Architectural historians documented every detail of the property, creating a comprehensive record of its historical significance. Eleanor's life settled into a new rhythm: mornings spent overseeing the restoration work, afternoons dedicated to foundation planning and artifact cataloging, evenings researching the Blackwood family history to better understand the context of her discovery. Throughout this period, she remained alert for signs of the presence that had guided her to the vault. While the dramatic manifestations had ceased after her discovery, no more whispering voices or sudden cold spots. Eleanor occasionally sensed a subtle awareness in certain rooms, particularly the library and nursery. Not frightening or intrusive, just a gentle reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in her stewardship of the property. 6 months after her initial discovery, Eleanor hosted a small, private gathering to celebrate the completed restoration of the mansion's exterior and main public rooms. Rebecca, Catherine, Dr. Bennett, And the core team of advisors who had helped navigate the extraordinary journey gathered in the now gleaming entrance hall, raising glasses to toast what they had accomplished together. When I first met Eleanor at that county auction, I never imagined we'd be standing here today, Rebecca said, looking around at the beautifully restored woodwork and period-appropriate furnishings. From a desperate housing solution to one of the most significant historical preservation projects in the region, it's truly remarkable. To Eleanor, Catherine added, whose courage and integrity have ensured that the Blackwood legacy will be properly preserved and honored. Eleanor accepted their praise with characteristic modesty. I was just the messenger, she said quietly. The right person in the right place at the right time. After the guests departed, Eleanor wandered through the quiet rooms of the mansion, her home now, in a way she never could have imagined when she first walked through its dusty halls. The library, with its restored bookshelves and carefully preserved hidden entrance, still felt like the heart of the house. The portrait of Cornelius Blackwood, professionally cleaned and restored, seemed less stern now. There was almost a hint of approval in those painted eyes. Standing beneath the portrait, Eleanor reflected on the strange connection that had formed across time between a 19th-century industrialist forced to abandon his home and fortune, and a 21st-century widow who had lost everything before finding far more than she had ever dreamed possible. The Blackwood Fraser Foundation was now officially established, with an endowment that would ensure its mission for generations to come. The first projects were already underway: restoration grants for historical properties in danger of demolition, housing security programs for elderly residents facing displacement, educational initiatives bringing local history to life for school children. In the coming weeks, selected areas of Oakwood Manor would open for limited public tours, sharing the architectural and historical significance of the property, while maintaining the privacy of Eleanor's living spaces. The carriage house, her first project on the property, had been fully restored as a private guest residence, a reminder of where her journey had begun. The Whispering House, as locals still sometimes called it, had transformed from a deteriorating relic to a vibrant historical site and comfortable home. The whispers that had once frightened away potential owners had guided Eleanor to not just personal security, but to a purpose larger than herself. 1 year to the day after receiving her eviction notice, the catalyst that had set this extraordinary journey in motion, Eleanor sat in the library of Oakwood Manor, writing in her journal. The room, now warm with golden lamplight and the rich colors of restored furnishings, bore little resemblance to the dusty, abandoned space she had first encountered. Today marks 1 year since what seemed like the end of everything, she wrote. That moment of despair that actually opened the door to possibilities I never could have imagined. I've been thinking about what I've learned through this remarkable experience. First, that rock bottom can sometimes be a foundation rather than an ending. When I spent my last dollars on this mansion, it wasn't desperation. It was the first step on a path I couldn't yet see. Second, that we're connected across time in ways we rarely recognize. Cornelius Blackwood created a legacy that waited patiently for the right moment, the right person. How many other connections might exist in our lives, waiting to be discovered, if we're willing to listen for the whispers? Third, that wealth itself is neutral, it's purpose that gives it meaning. Blackwood understood this when he wrote of building, creating, protecting. The foundation we've established will continue that vision, using resources not just to preserve the past, but to secure futures for others facing their own moments of desperation. And finally, that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest question: what if? What if I bid on that abandoned mansion? What if I explore that hidden room? What if I believe what seems impossible? As Eleanor closed her journal, she noticed the subtle shift in the air that had become familiar, that gentle awareness that she wasn't quite alone. No dramatic temperature drop, no disembodied whisper, just the comfortable sense of shared purpose. Across the boundaries of time. Rising from her desk, Eleanor walked to the window overlooking the now restored gardens, brilliant with autumn colors in the late afternoon sunlight. Beyond the formal plantings, she could see the newly established community garden where local families were learning to grow their own food on a portion of the property she had opened for public use. Tomorrow would bring a new group of visitors for the historical tour, more proposals for the foundation to consider, ongoing restoration work on the third floor, and countless other tasks. But tonight, in this peaceful moment, Eleanor simply savored the journey that had brought her here, from eviction notice to steward of a legacy that would extend far beyond her own lifetime. The widow who had spent her last dollars on a supposedly haunted mansion had found not just shelter but purpose, not just wealth but meaning, not just a house, but a home with history breathing through its walls. And in that transformation lay a message for others facing their own moments of desperation, that endings can become beginnings, that whispers might be worth heeding, that the darkest moments might simply be the time before dawn. As twilight deepened outside the windows of Oakwood Manor, no longer the Whispering House, but the Blackwood Fraser Historical Home and Foundation, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, and for whatever journey still lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.